Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this BCS Change event. Today we have this crazy little thing called change. Very exciting, isn't it? I'm delighted to have Eileen Roden with us. She's an experienced PMO and PPM consultant and trainer, specializing in the development and delivery of bespoke training and consultancy to help organizations improve their delivery capability in a range of industry sectors, including transport, finance, pharmaceuticals, defense, utilities, and the public sector. We're going to have 45 minutes of presentation. When you have any question, please put it in the chat at the very bottom of your screen, and we will be looking into the questions and answering to them. And also at the end of the presentation, you will have chance to ask more questions. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted afterwards in our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria, and good evening, everybody, on what is quite a blustery and windy evening here in Solihull. So hopefully where you are, you're not getting torrential rain and you've got some sunshine and a little bit of heat left from the summer. So tonight we've got this subject called that crazy little thing called change, and I'm hoping you've all read the kind of synopsis and got some idea about what tonight's going to involve. It was interesting when Zahir asked me to talk this evening. She didn't quite mention the fact that it was going to be the business change specific interest group. So this has been a kind of putting together something that hopefully is not just a kind of a bit of a regurgitation of the standard kind of change management theory. I'm hoping to bring something a little bit different, because change has so many different dimensions when we're talking around projects and programs. So if you're an experienced business change manager, hopefully there'll be something in here for you today. If you're new to business change management, again, hopefully you'll pick a few things up. If I skip over bits of theory that I work on the assumption that you actually don't understand or have never heard of, do stick something in chat and say, hold on a minute, Eileen, you need to go over that in a little bit more detail. So feel free to do as much as you want in the questions. Lindsay's working with me, so she'll make sure that I pick up questions that need to be covered off. If I don't immediately pick up your question, the chances are it's because I'm in the middle of a flow, or it'll go on to somewhere later on in the presentation. So as we go through this evening, what we'll do is we'll have a bit of theory. I will do some hints and tips, and I will give you the opportunity to do some sharing. We're going to be using some technology called Mentimeter, so BCS. Not terrified of using new technology. Hopefully some people have used Mentimeter before. We'll give you the opportunity to type in some things and get some input that way. When we finish the presentation, all of that will be in the presentation, which can be circulated out on the YouTube channel as well. So and I just wanted to mention that the things that come through on Mentimeter, they're anonymous, so it will not be associated with your name. We'll not know the source of that. They will just kind of come up nameless, unless you put your name in. Of course, if you want to claim some of the things that you're going to contribute, then kind of feel free to put your name in there. But welcome everybody to talk a little bit about this crazy little thing called change. And I still, as you'll see here in my shed at the bottom of the garden, we can always say if the house goes on fire, this will burn for a month because of the amount of books we have in here. And I like to go back and just kind of look at some kind of basic kind of definitions about what change is all about. And I've already mentioned, you know, there's lots of different meanings of change, and we've got lots of people who are involved in change in a project. And the standard kind of definition, good old dictionary.com, not even Google, dictionary.com, talks to us about kind of transforming or converting things to become different and to become altered and modified. And I often think when we talk about change management, it's really kind of, I'm not sure people enjoy being altered or modified. Very easy to start thinking about altering code and kind of changing some systems. But when we're talking about proper business change management, we're actually talking about transforming the organization, and it isn't just about the products of the project. It is also about kind of people kind of working differently, doing things differently, perhaps being in a slightly different role, using some different tools and techniques, being exposed to a whole range of new things. and they have to be altered and modified in terms of their skills and possibly their behaviours. And so the interesting is we talk about we have to make a material difference so that the thing is distinctly different from what it was, and that can be kind of quite a challenge for a few people who quite enjoy where they are at the moment, what they're doing. They feel quite comfortable in their ability to do their role. They know how to do things. They've seen it around their organisation for a number of years, and any kind of change naturally can cause a bit of concern for individuals. So we're going to talk about kind of three key players. Now, this is where my PowerPoint has just suddenly died a death. Now, Lindsay, can you just tell me what you can see there? Because this is we've had fun with my PowerPoint all day today. So it's not good. So Lindsay, can you just type in and tell me what you can see? So you can still see that slide, and it doesn't appear to want to go to the next slide. Bear with me for one moment and I shall restart the PowerPoint. Technology, who would live with it? Yes. There we go, it's just starting up again. There we go. Brilliant, so you should be fine with that now, right then. So here we go. How quick does that come back? Right then, so we got to this kind of change. So as we said, there's going to be three key players we're going to talk about this evening. We're going to talk about something from the sponsor's perspective, who's involved in projects and programs. We're going to talk about the project manager and their involvement in project and programs and the change aspect. And we're also going to be talking about the business user. And the last time I spoke at BCS, there was very much a focus, not enough focus on Agile. So I deliberately this time picked some specific roles and some specific activities that are relative to both a waterfall project and an Agile project. So hopefully I haven't left anybody out in the audience in terms of their contribution for change. Now you'll recognise that from my organisation, I'm from PMO Learning. So PMO is my speciality. So you will find every now and again that these PMO people will kind of pop up in the corner just because we like to involve them around projects and programs to help and support delivery. So first of all, let's kind of go and then have a play with sponsors. So we're still in a number of organisations where sponsors do not recognise or are not recognised as having a key role to play on any and every project. There is oodles of research around the place that says an engaged and competent sponsor can have a material impact on project success. And I'm going to talk through some aspects of project complexity which contribute to the role of the project sponsor, can define the role of the project sponsor, and also can give the project sponsor a particular focus as we kind of start up the project, but also as we execute through the project. So one of the roles of the project sponsor is to ensure that there is the right level of governance set up around the project. So even if we've got a standard project management methodology that's used across the organisation, that's mandated, there is still a level of control that the project sponsor is there to safeguard the money that's been invested in that project. And there's lots of kind of books and papers around on project complexity, but there's some work done a number of years ago, which was done by, which was led out of Cranfield University, which was entitled "How Hard Can It Be?" And this was specifically looking at managing complexity in technology projects. I don't know whether you've seen the paper. I can point you to it after the event if you're interested. It was written by Harvey Mailer, Neil Turner and Ruth Murray Webster, and actually what they did out of that paper, they've actually kind of come up with a complexity assessment tool which is downloadable and can be used in organisations. But I just want to talk about kind of how this impacts the change that's been delivered by the project sponsor. So the project sponsor is there. If you do your the change management, the contact change management, the sponsor there is leading and directing the change across the organisation. And how hard and difficult that is all down to the level of complexity. And what Harvey and Neil and Ruth found out after kind of an awful lot of searching is that actually the definition of kind of complexity has never really been crystallized when it comes to projects. So they've actually identified 3 different types of complexity when it comes to projects. So the first one that they identified was structural complexity, and there's lots of conversations that say structural complexity is really hard, and the other 2 are proper hard. Okay, so the first one is structural complexity. We'll kind of talk a bit about that. Structural complexity increases with the number of people who are involved in the project, the financial scale. It's really about the kind of the size and scale and all of the kind of the typical things that we think of when somebody says how big and ugly is your project. Now, the second element of complexity looks at something called socio-political complexity. Now, this is about the human interactions that happen in and around the project, and are naturally, if you're working in a public sector, you have capital P and little p politics to play with. But even in the private sector, there are often people in our organisations who surprisingly have their own agendas. We don't get stakeholders who always agree, and very often the socio-political complexity is an unspoken word that the project manager constantly feels the brunt of as they go through the project. It's visible to everybody, but it's like the elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk to. And of all of the complexities, it's the socio-political complexity that is the most difficult to deal with, because good old human beings, not only have they got their own agendas and have their own politics to play, we're not always consistent. Yes, sometimes we get out of bed the wrong side. Sometimes we trip over the cat as we go down to our desk. We've long gone on the journeys into work for the last few months, but there are lots of things that can kind of impact how we feel about the work, how about the project and the change that's kind of coming through. The third type of complexity is something called emergent complexity, and emergent complexity says that there is more and more complexity that will only become visible as we move through the project, because not everything is predictable, and we're almost anticipating that our understanding of the project is not what it is today. It will move as we go through the project, and some of that kind of emergent complexity is actually looked at in terms of the whole agile approach. People may have heard of the VUCA environment we live in. VUCA, so volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. So this kind of, the world continues to move at a pace, and the context at which we're delivering the solution that we're designing may have to change as we kind of work through that lifespan. So the 3 different types of complexity are often assessed at the beginning of a project. Very many of you, in fact, it'd be interesting to kind of see if you've got in the question and answer, there's not seen anything in there yet, but if anybody of you has, any of your organizations have a complexity matrix, so often at the beginning of the project, often in the collection of the portfolio and putting the portfolio together, projects will go through a complexity matrix that will look at various aspects to see how big and ugly the project is, which will often determine the kind of the funding, the level of experience of the project sponsor who gets given that project to lead, and also from a project management perspective in terms of having somebody who's engaged. And we often take complexity as something that is fixed and set, and something that we just have to deal with as we go through the project. So what Harvey, Neil and Ruth looked at is said, well, actually, what we should be doing right at the very beginning of our project is not just accepting the level of complexity. We can actually look to remove, reduce, and proactively address the sources of the complexity on that project. So there is things that we can do to reduce the amount of complexity, which will increase the chances of success for that project. So it will increase the chance of project management success for the project manager, but it will also increase the chances of delivering the benefits that have been planned for the project sponsor. So really kind of getting our hands around and understanding the complexity, understanding where we can take that out. Just have a quick look. In the assessment tool, there are 32 various questions that it asks you to do an assessment on. The first 21 of those statements are all based on structural complexity. So the assessment tool asks you to do two things. Firstly, it says, do you agree with these statements? I've just kind of picked 8 just to give you a sample of what the structural complexity statements might be. Do you agree with those statements? And how confident are you that the answers that you give at this point are actually going to be stable through the life of the project? So we may be in a position, if you look at that first question there, that the commercial arrangements are quite familiar to us, but we may anticipate that actually we're going to go into new territories further on down. So again, the good old kind of Brexit, as the commercial arrangements are fine at the moment, we know exactly how to deal with our foreign partners, but actually come 3, 6, 12 months further on down the line as Brexit happens, those commercial arrangements are going to become unfamiliar. So from an emergent perspective, we know the answer now, but we don't know what the answer is going to be in 3 or 6 months' time. So we've got 21 statements around structural complexity. And typically, when we're dealing with structural complexity, we offset this by risks in the risk register. So, you know, you look at the things that we've got on there, the scope can be well defined. We've got processes in place in terms of change control and baselining and budgeting that will help us keep that managed. We've got things like a schedule and a resource plan can be well defined. If we're struggling to pull that together, quite often we'll have a risk in the risk register that will offset that. And you'll find that most of the project management training we get deals with these kind of structural complexities. And we're very much kind of looking at kind of how soon can we get the deliverables produced and out the door, out the other side. And we've got lots of kind of thinking about kind of organizing some logistical kind of way of moving things forward when it comes to structural complexity. Now, the socio-political complexity statements become a little bit more close to the bone and become a little bit more difficult to have conversations with around the project manager, the project sponsor. And sometimes you'll say there's some challenges there in terms of, even though you're the project sponsor and you're delivering this change, there is some negative feeling towards the project from other senior managers. And I'm sure there are a number of sponsors, if there's sponsors on the call, where not only are we struggling with some of the senior management support, but actually we as a sponsor are struggling to really kind of support the project because we question its provenance in terms of where it's come from. Often we're working with kind of directives that have come from kind of international or head office that we have to deal with. And so this kind of socio-political complexity has a real impact on your, as a sponsor, as your kind of commitment to the project. And it's interesting in terms of how that also reflects from the project manager, because they will be struggling to do that level of engagement with the rest of the key stakeholders, potentially the project board and some of the end users. So it's really important right at the very beginning of the project to have a real honest understanding of what the socio-political complexity is of your organization, because very often this dimension of complexity is something that's self-imposed by the organization. The previous structural complexity is often dealt with through our analysis of PESTEL, is often kind of can come from the outside world, but very often this element of complexity comes internally and is very much within the hands of the project sponsor to try and address some of the aspects that can be picked up. So one of the things that again kind of often falls down to the project manager is the stakeholder engagement piece. And if you've got a large level of socio-political complexity as a project sponsor, it's absolutely critical that you play an active role in project sponsorship, in stakeholder engagement, and have those conversations to try and get people aligned and on board and make sure that the project is given the visibility and the support is required for the project manager to be able to deliver within that framework. The final element of complexity is this concept of emergent complexity. And again, the emergent complexity is really a factor of both the structural and socio-political complexity that's been assessed previously. So getting an understanding, you can kind of use the tool, it's kind of freely available. There are consultants who can come and support you through that to try and reduce complexity right at the very beginning of the project. So 3 tips for our project sponsor. Firstly is the work on the project actually needs to start long before the project manager is appointed. As you are appointed the project sponsor, yes, it's about having an understanding right at that kind of early stage in the project about what the vibes are around the organisation, around this particular project, and trying to engage early with some of those key stakeholders. And this alignment to organisational strategy is a key element in providing worthwhile contribution of your time and the organisation's investment in those projects. There is a time to have some difficult conversations, and often just having the conversation eases the project manager's concerns and provides a kind of a level of support and makes it much easier to address how those elements can be addressed. And certainly a key part of the sponsorship's role to ensure that that change is going to go through well is to make sure that you continue to focus on stakeholder engagement and communication. And we're going to come back to this kind of stakeholder engagement and communication when we come to talk about the business user. Now, I did say we're going to be looking at kind of the sponsor, the project manager, and the business unit, but we are just going to talk up for a minute around the PMO. So if you're sitting out there and you're working as a PMO in an organisation, part of the role of the PMO is often to develop with the organisation, kind of the senior execs, what that complexity matrix is. And it also becomes a kind of, now you can kind of look at starting to put a separate step around that complexity matrix, not about just assessing what that complexity is, but actually having a conversation with kind of the senior execs and the appointed sponsors about how can we reduce the level of complexity before we start actually doing the final scope and delivery of that project based on some of the things that we may have created internally. Some difficult conversations to be had. So those are my kind of 3 hints and tips and a little pointer for the PMO. I did promise you, because I'm convinced that of the 70 people who are here on the call, you've got some other hints and tips around project and leading complex change from a sponsorship perspective. So if you're on your PC, you can do this in a separate window. You can also do this on your telephone. If you go in there and type www.menti.com, as you can see there at the top of the screen, it will have a little window in there. It'll just have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You need to be able to type 4718. Is that a 64 at the top? And what it'll do is it will allow you to type in some further advice that you could give to project sponsors as they deal with some complexities right at the very beginning of the project. So now this is the bit where I have to kind of talk amongst myself while you get to log on and type in those answers. It will allow you to have more than one answer. If you're struggling to get into Mentimeter, feel free to kind of put your comments into the organisers and panelists in the chat window. So I am hoping that at least one person will put some. Don't forget to press the submit button So we actually kind of see it, and we'll see it arrive on the screen. So we've not got a single person yet, so I'm just going to check that that works. Hopefully my trusty colleague Lindsay is already there and typing in something. So there is one done that's ready to come through. We always have fun with Mentimeter. The link through to PowerPoint is not always as good as it can be. So what I can do is actually show you the slide in Mentimeter. So let's see what's kind of come up. Right then, so if I share this with you, you can kind of see. There we go, can you see that? So there's some things coming through there, yes. So they need to be invested in the project outcome, yes. So it's really interesting in terms of kind of that better contribution of the project sponsors. There we go, we've got things coming through as well. So prepare. Yes, it's often, we often feel the project actually doesn't start until the project manager arrives on board. The reality is it starts a long time before that, as it becomes the whole idea kind of starts to form, and part of that forming basis should be getting all of that alignment of strategy. So hopefully, you know, we get to the kind of the socio-political, I just call it the people complexity. The people complexity actually kind of as low as possible. Yes, and absolutely, it isn't just about the PM's work. I work with an organisation who has developed their bespoke project lifecycle, and their lifecycle used to be plan, and then it would go into deliver, and they've deliberately changed it. Instead of kind of plan and execute phase, they've talked about plan and steering and execution, because they tried to kind of make sure that the project sponsor knew that they have an ongoing role. So we've got a few other things there about understanding the kind of the technical aspects. The technical aspect usually sits in the structural complexity piece, but it's interesting about from the sponsor actually kind of taking and owning the complexity of the project rather than leaving it down to the project manager. Excellent. So all of the responses that you've got in there, we've had kind of 14 people respond in there, so that's good to get some interaction. Hopefully we'll get some more further on down the project, down the presentation. So I shall just take that away and try and get the presentation back on track. So let's have a look at the next element. So the next thing we want to look at is the project manager. And interestingly, from a project manager's perspective, they're usually there as the person kind of driving the change through, driving the kind of the deliverables and production of that. But actually the project manager themselves actually has to continually change how they lead and manage the project. And I think sometimes we forget that as a project manager, you're dealing with change on a daily basis, because you're having to be the chameleon in terms of the various different people that you have to deal with, and trying to get a variety of different individuals to contribute in the most kind of effective way to deliver the project successfully. And I always think kind of, you know, even if you've got the best team in the world, the project is difficult to deliver. Having some kind of variable kind of individuals who have different things going on and other priorities, trying to kind of manage that becomes quite hard. And sometimes it's very easy to kind of get focused on delivering the work and forgetting to we lose sight of the individuals who are working on the project. And one of the things that Stephen Covey always talks about is that people take a significant amount of time and or energy in order to kind of truly engage. So, you know, we have this kind of conversation versus management versus leadership, and sometimes people come up with a kind of really easy answer in terms of, well, the project manager is there to manage the project and it's the sponsor who does all of the leadership. And I really think about managing is really only about managing kind of things and work. And the project manager still has a leadership role about guiding, influencing, and persuading the project team. And you know, from a management perspective, what we can do if we take that attitude of we're just kind of managing things to get things done, we often end up with a level of compliance. So we get people to do what needs to be done, but we have to be kind of constantly there and kind of, you know, kind of keeping the nose to the grindstone and getting that work delivered. Once we start doing some leadership, we very much end up with a level of commitment from the project team. So actually they get to want to do what you want them to do, which is really where we want to be, because it becomes a much more effective use of their time and skills, but also much more effective in terms of your time and skills as a project manager to lead other areas of the project and to spend time not doing that direct management activity. Now, we often, as you've gone through your project management training, you will undoubtedly have come across several leadership theories associated with project management. So 3 of the kind of the big ones are up there. Authentic leadership has been around for a while now. Servant leadership, absolutely tied into agile. And if anybody's done kind of the project management course, they will undoubtedly have spent at least all of 20 minutes talking about situational leadership. But I just want to spend a little bit more time on situational leadership, because to me, situational leadership gets really to the essence of the relationship between the project manager and the project team, and really does require you to be this kind of chameleon who can flex and shift to the various people who we've got working on our project. So I'll just give you kind of a quick resume of the kind of the situational leadership. And as I say, for those of you who may not have gone through this, I don't want to talk about it in any great detail because I want to get onto kind of the practical side of this, but I'll put the touches of the theory in here. In terms of the situational leadership, what we talk about is 2 aspects. Firstly is about the actual kind of the leader themselves, the project manager, and your ability to flex, to kind of work with the various people in your team. But we have to recognize that all of the members of the team are at different stages of their development and capability, but also in terms of they will be going through their own feelings and kind of responses to what's been delivered on their project. So funnily enough, not everybody is hugely enthusiastic about some of the tasks that need to be done. Very often I have got 4 lovely children, and there's quite a few of those out of the 4 of them hate making difficult phone calls, and they say, "Mum, will you just give them a ring for me, please?" And again, we've got things on the project that are sometimes a little bit more uncomfortable to do, some of the difficult conversations to have, some of the difficult stakeholders to meet. And so as a project manager, we've got 2 things that we really need to be kind of constantly conscious of when we're dealing with each of the individual team members. As I said, they're all going to be different. So at this kind of first level here, we're going to be talking about the enthusiastic beginner. So not necessarily hugely experienced at the role, but dead keen. Yes. And we have to kind of adapt a particular leadership style, or it seemed to be most appropriate at that level, and try to provide them with some structure, making sure we give them some latitude to kind of do a piece of work, but making sure that we kind of constantly got that guidance because they don't necessarily have the experience to do that role. There are the kind of at the next level up, where we're talking about somebody who's probably got a little bit more skill, but possibly got a little bit less commitment because it's a particular task. Then we have to kind of adapt our leadership style to a much more kind of coaching leadership style, where we're encouraging them, we're providing them with kind of some short tasks that can see some improvement, can kind of see some development, and they can see the next thing coming down that they may have a little bit more kind of desire to undertake. These kind of 2 aspects can obviously kind of take quite a bit of our time, and it becomes a real challenge sometimes to actually kind of find the time to take the time with each of those kind of people who are working on our team. Another person who often, but is a different approach, is somebody who we would call the capable but cautious performer. So this is the individual who we think is actually kind of quite competent, yes, but they're quite nervous, so they're not quite sure that they're not quite convinced that they've got the full capability to be able to do the job. So when we talk about them being unwilling to do it, we're not talking about the fact that they don't want to do the work, but they're just nervous that they can't complete it. And in those kind of situations, we actually need to develop a supporting leadership style. So we need to be there to kind of catch them, trying to kind of facilitate them, kind of again, let them see us there, that we can kind of catch them if they're going to struggle, but actually try to give them the confidence to actually kind of proceed with the tasks and activities. The final element the final kind of type of kind of team leader, and I realize it's kind of a simplified model but helpful in thinking about how we deal with them, is this self-reliant achiever. So this is somebody who's hugely capable and who is very willing to do the work that needs to be undertaken. And for this type of individual, then we're going to be giving them some kind of delegated activity. So again, we can kind of leave them to it. We know we can kind of trust them. We know that they're going to come back to us and ask some questions. So this is obviously when we get somebody to being a self-reliant achiever, is where we start kind of really recouping some of the benefits of kind of moving them through this process. I do think it's important to suggest that we don't necessarily buttonhole anybody into any one of these particular categories, because depending on the task that I'm doing, I may be an enthusiastic beginner. So I started painting a couple of years ago, and I would suggest I'm still an enthusiastic beginner, yes? So I'm dead keen to go out there and give it a go, but not always necessarily get a kind of a good job. There are things that I don't necessarily want to do when I'm kind of in my kind of day job. So, I may end up being the disillusioned learner, perfectly capable of doing it, but not keen. They're the things that kind of get to the bottom of the to-do list at the end of every day. Again, I can be quite practiced at something, but be quite nervous because I'm in a new audience or I'm doing it on a new subject. And again, there are other subjects that I'm perfectly happy to run with. So when we're talking about this kind of situational leadership, often the conversation is about people sit in this box or other people sit in that box. What we have to recognize is that people will move through each of those boxes depending on necessarily how they're feeling that particular day, but also in terms of quite specifically around the task that they are completing. And in order to be a good leader, yes, in order to be able to kind of change and flex, there are three different things that we need to be able to develop the skills of. So firstly, being able to flex our leadership styles. So we've kind of put four styles up there. We naturally have one that feels most comfortable to us in terms of how we like to lead our project. And very often, if we're in a very kind of a stress project, it would be really nice to kind of have a whole team of self-reliant achievers where we can do appropriate delegation and people can get on and do their job. But typically we're going to have to flex between all four of those slides, those leadership styles. And that can be quite tiring and exhausting because we need to keep a constant check-in with our team around the activities that they've got to deliver in order to be able to kind of flex comfortably. So we need to be able to correctly assess our team members' ability to do that task and their willingness to undertake it. Now, this is the one that always kind of makes me smile. We may be very good at being able to adapt to all of those styles. We may be quite good at reading the individuals, but actually what we really struggle with is picking the right style for that particular task, for that particular individual on that particular day. So there's these kind of three things that we're going to have to develop around each of our team, and it all takes time. It's development for us as we're constantly having to think about the language that we use, the time scale of the tasks that we're allocating, how often we're going to have to be reporting and checking up on the individuals who are delivering those tasks. So a great project manager will have quite comfortably kind of adapted all of those three abilities. But I often think we we don't often necessarily kind of take the time to think about it and make a conscious effort around those 4 different styles and actually practice the skill of what directing leadership actually looks like, what coaching leadership actually looks like, and actually develop our skills as a coach. So and some people find, you know, we can do the kind of the support and the helping hand, but actually we find delegation really difficult because we're a bit of a control freak, because that's why we do project management, because we want to be in control of things that are going to be delivered. So it's really important that we can develop all of those four styles. And as a project manager delivering change, we're having to change on a daily basis in terms of how we manage and get on with our team. So we're going to try the good old Mentimeter again. So it's the same number. The question should come up on your screen. Just interested in terms of, from our audience, of how many of these 3 abilities are you fully proficient at? So I've not talked about the leadership style. I'm talking about, can you flex? Can you assess your team members and the tasks that they're undertaking? And can you always get the right style of leadership for those situations? So first answer there is, we've got a smattering of all 3, but could do with honing my skills. Well, we've got one of them firmly under our belt and we've got that sorted. So we're quite good at assessing how the team members feel. We're not necessarily quite good at kind of flexing and actually kind of being the right leader at the time. So we're at a 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Some of you might recognize the song reference there. Third one is, the 4th one there is, well, actually, I've been around the block a bit and I reckon I'm good at all 3 of those. But the final answer is, there's not only have I been around the block a bit and I'm good at all of those 3, but actually my team would agree with me as well. And that's often an interesting kind of deciding factor as to whether the teams would be involved in that as well. So hopefully, have we got that question up? I'm sure somebody's going to tell me. We can start seeing. There we go. We've got the lovely balls. And we can see, yes, which is exactly kind of what I'd expected. So we've got a smattering of all 3, but we could probably do with honing our skills. And I think, you know, we can get very kind of caught up in delivering change and we don't recognize that we have to do this kind of constant change ourselves. So I'm really I'm curious out of the kind of those people who've got 2 out of 3 ain't bad, which one are particularly we're struggling with in terms of the which one of the 3 that we haven't got. So if anybody wants to stick that into the chat, that would be great. So everybody see that on Menti? Yep. We're going to have some we've got a couple more things on Menti, but what I'll do is I'll use it in the slide pack so people can see that. There's that a bit easier for people to see. So we've got 11 people, so we've got about 17 or 18 people again who are joining in the Menti. Right then, so back to the presentation for a moment then. In terms of my hints and tips for you as the project managers, we actually need to take time to get to know our team. If we're working on a very big project, there's lots of psychometric tests that we can kind of do, sorry, not psychometric tests, psychometric profiling, actually getting to know and understand our team. Get a level of trust so you can have some conversations with your team about how best to kind of manage certain situations. And there is something about recognizing what your own default leadership style is and recognizes where your challenges are. And interestingly, when we were talking about from the project sponsor's perspective about prepare, practice and reflect, again, that's from a project manager's perspective. If I know that I'm not particularly good at the delegating style, then actually if I know I've got a task that I've got somebody absolutely capable of doing it and really willing to do it, I need to challenge myself and have a conversation with that individual to say, it is quite difficult for me to delegate, but I'm going to try to do this. So if I come and kind of get on your nerves, just give me just tell me, back off, Eileen, you said I can have till Friday. I'll come and ask you when I'm having a struggle, but let me do that. So interestingly, that kind of preparation and practice, it takes time, and very often I know we're struggling. Interestingly, in terms of kind of the weak areas that are kind of coming through, it's that ability to pick the right style for the right moment. And again, that's about really having getting to know your team and being able to have a conversation with them about it, because it's not about kind of there's nothing wrong with being in any one of those kind of 4 categories, because we all go through that, as I mentioned before, and it's about kind of everybody being comfortable that they're being managed and developed and supported through whatever stage they are at. And interestingly, just from a PMO competence framework, I think what is really important is that we recognise and continue to develop leadership in the project management competence framework. Interestingly, having worked with lots of organisations, we talk about having leadership and standard. We know the organisation does kind of leadership skills, but I often think in a project context there are some additional challenges, and looking about leadership, project leadership has some additional things that should sit there in the competence framework, and we should be looking at developer project managers to support them. So we're going to go to the dreaded Mentimeter again, but I am just going to call it kind of up on the screen. So hopefully you can kind of see that here and start thinking about, is there any other advice you would give to project managers? So we may have people out there who are working on the project team, and we may have some sponsors out there, we may have some business users out there. What, from your experience, anything you want to add to how you manage your team and develop your skills in this ever-changing situational leadership? So we've got have some frequent discussions. Oh, look, it's even actually come up on the presentation this time. That's amazing. So think about value add. So interesting about what do you mean by the value add? Is it getting more from your team? So being able to get some additional effort out of your project team members if you're using them in the right way and supporting them correctly. Great thing about celebrating some small successes, particularly when we're in the kind of the coaching and supporting, where, you know, we're perhaps struggling with kind of somebody who's not fully confident or is struggling with kind of the motivation to do the work. So it's great things there. Bring a very large flask of coffee, or if you have a water bottle, have water in it. Yes, something with ice, that's for sure. Okay. Interestingly, in terms of interesting there about kind of tell the team about how the tasks have been split up, and sometimes the justification for who's been given what tasks and why somebody's got a difficult task to do, because actually it's kind of stretching and learning for them around their own personal development. Excellent. So quite a bit of things going on there. Interesting, this kind of unconscious bias. There's, you know, we all have some inbuilt or kind of developed biases around a whole range of things. And the important thing, there's a great one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits is listen first to understand. And so it really is about getting in there and listening and understanding, rather than coming with your preconceived ideas. Particularly often when we're on a project team, we don't get to choose who our project managers are. Who our project team are. We get given people, so we really need to take people with an open mind as they arrive on the project. So excellent, we've hit 18 contributions. That's improving as we go through the presentation. There is just kind of one more aspect that I want to talk about, which is the business user. Okay, so interestingly, in terms of the business user, we talk about these are the people who are going to have to change and have to live with new change and kind of move through as we go through the project. And I think if we're quite inexperienced and we get focused on just delivering the change to the kind of the system and putting that out there, some of the business users feels that change has been done to them rather than kind of with them or for them. And it's a very different perspective that we take. So rather than our kind of end users kind of just surviving the change. You've still got a job, it might be a bit different, but at least you're here. We should really be aiming for them to be thriving after the project has been delivered in order to deliver the planned benefits for the organisation. And that's a very different approach in terms of the activities that we undertake, the communication that we have, the relationships that we build up, and the set of activities we take those business users through as the project proceeds. Now, this won't be new to anybody, I don't think, in terms of the change curve. This is what we often get taught through in terms of as people get to understand the change that's going to be delivered, they will go through these kind of natural set of emotions, and ideally people will go through them kind of quite quickly. You can go through all of those in a very short period of time, in a matter of days, depending on the size of the change. But there are some people who get stuck at anger, at depression. There are some people who live in denial, and I know people who live in denial until the day after the project's gone live, and they go, hold on, I didn't know we were going to get something new. I haven't been on the training or anything. Was I meant to go on the training? So we have these people who get kind of stopped along the way, and good practice and good theory will tell us that actually good communication and kind of being open and honest with the users will help them kind of move through this curve much more swiftly. But I think we're becoming much more understanding now around not just the kind of the working environment and the person who we see at work, but the whole kind of mental and well-being of the individual. And there is another approach we can take to help people through the change curve. And this is looking at the concept of resilience. So if we look good old dictionary.com, the definition of resilience is about the power or ability to return to the original form position. So interesting in terms of we don't necessarily want them to go back to the old ways of working, but what we want the individual to do is, after they've been through the shock of the change and they've been stretched with some new learning and they've kind of been bent over backwards to help, what we want them to do is we want them to get back to being effective and confident and competent in the new ways of working. So rather than just the bog standard resilience, it's quite useful to start thinking about emotional resilience. So Greta Barwe in her book talks about emotional resilience is this ability to continually choose the feeling, thoughts and actions that help us achieve the results and perform at your best at personal, team and organizational level. Now, wouldn't that be absolutely brilliant if all of our business users were like that? And in fact, emotional resilience provides the foundation for human adaptability and agility. And what we've talked about is we now live in a world where things are going to continue to change. Things are, I've got my brother-in-law who is about to retire, and he's 57, 58, and he's worked in the same company all of his life. His sister, who retired earlier this year, she's done exactly the same. Now, there are very few of us who will be able to say, and certainly our children will be saying, I've worked for several different people, and so we're going to have to learn to adapt and be agile and pivot, small a, notice, adapt and pivot to the various situations that have taken its toll. And we've all had to do a bit of that over the last 3 months. So this developing emotional resilience and actually taking some time and developing that will actually speed the process of being able to deal with that change curve. So building resilience can actually be the game changer in delivering successful change. So it's almost like, when you take your a children out in the middle of the winter, you don't throw them out there and hope they're going to survive and give them a mug of soup when you go back. You prepare them, you wrap them up warm and you give them all of the things that they need to be able to cope with an expedition out in the freezing cold. And so this building resilience should be what we start thinking about now when we're going to deliver some of the changes into the organisation. And so ideally, resilience should be dealt with at a corporate or a departmental level. But what we should also be considering is actually at a project or program level, if we recognise that there are people who are going to go through some change who we don't feel have developed a level of resilience, and there's lots of kind of signposts out there to say that they're kind of really struggling with the change that's coming through, about making sure that as part of our project and our program that we spend time building resilience. And then finally, I think we each have a responsibility to ourselves to actually help build up our resilience. It always reminds me of the mask we have on when we remember the days when we used to fly places, when they used to say you have to kind of help yourself first. And so there is also kind of, we should all, and I'm not just talking about the people who are going through the change, but often the project manager and the project team, we need to kind of build up our resilience well, so we can deal with some of the kind of the challenges of delivering our project. I noticed there's a question there in terms of, we've covered quite a few themes today. What I'll do is I'm going to add an extra slide on the end of the presentation, and I'll put some books and some papers that's the dog trying to get in. I'll put some books and some papers that you can go back to for some further information. I don't know whether anybody's looked at resilience. There's quite a bit out there at the moment. Just to give you an example of one, WRAW has been developed now by the Wellbeing Project. So they do this for individuals, they do that for organisations. And what they say, in order to build resilience, there's 5 different elements that we kind of work through. So the first one is very much based around our energy. And those of you who know me will kind of perhaps kind of raise a smile at this one, but our energy is all about kind of our physical well-being, which includes kind of how much exercise, how well we eat, and that thing that tends to elude me, that kind of sleep thing. Yes, so all about that kind of just how much energy we've got to apply at work. The future focus, and again, this is where it becomes important from a change management, is because we have to be able to see what future we have. So it may not necessarily be certain, but we need to have some kind of we feel as though we have some control, and we can kind of make some decisions and contribute to where our next few steps are going to be. The third one there is inner drive, which talks about having the kind of the motivation, the self-belief, the self-esteem that we actually think we can kind of make this through. So again, you can kind of start seeing how some of these pillars of resilience are really good building blocks for taking people through the change. The next one is flexible thinking. So this is about being open-minded and positive, and having a kind of a positive outlook. Now, this becomes really difficult if you've not got some of the other pillars. If you're really tired, you can't see where kind of the work's going and how your kind of job's going to work, or what kind of processes you're going to be following. So this kind of flexible thinking kind of needs the other pillars also to be in place. And this final one, which is really where kind of some of the business change managers come, and some of the project management and the project team come in, is about building some kind of strong relationships, building some trust, and providing some support to the people who are going to be going through that change. So that's just an example of a particular resilience framework. There are other frameworks out there. I can give you some details on this one, but there are, as I say, there are several others out there. But often, as I say, I think we spend our time kind of trying to get people through the change. We're actually preparing them through developing their resilience, would actually make that journey much easier. So there's a couple of things in terms of hints and tips for dealing with kind of the business users, is actually starting, there's quite a few tools out there about measuring resilience as a component of business readiness. Okay, so that's an interesting bit around that. When we're investing here, we're investing for long-term performance. It's not just about getting us over the finishing line. Yes, everybody's kind of been trained on how the new thing works. Yes, we've got the new organisation structure in place. What we're trying to do is get them back to being comfortable and fit and well and confident and healthy in their new job. And as I've said, perhaps the project team might need it too, not just the change people. One of the things that actually we're seeing a lot of in the PMO, so I don't know anybody recognises that is that so we've got mental health first aiders, and typically we're finding in organisations that PMOs are picking up some of that mental health first aid work, because they get round and see quite a few people who are in the project. So conscious that I'm a bit over my 45 minutes. One last kind of attempt at Mentimeter. I will get the slide up so you can see that. So just again about any advice. So I recognize, I'm not the only person who knows about this. So if you've got anything you can add for value for the business change users or those who are managing business change, stick that into Mentimeter with the number on there, and we'll see what comes through. While you're doing that, I'll just have a quick look at what questions have come up. Okay. So there's quite a bit in terms of kind of what's required. Interestingly, in terms of that comment around the some of the complexity things, remind me of OGC's common causes of failure. Absolutely. If you have a look at the top 3 or 4, they are always the socio-political, not the structural ones. They do appear, but it's the socio-political complexity that is always the kind of the top of the list. So we've got a few things here: communicate, 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 and absolutely, I don't disagree with that, communicate. But often, if people are not in a good place themselves and their head's not in the right space, they often become deaf. So when we're doing examinations, I always find it quite it happens. Everybody, even though we've got really experienced people who sometimes do the exam, I hand them the exam papers out and they go deaf. Yes, so I can say to them, write your name in this box, and you can guarantee 10 out of the 12 people will say, Eileen, where do we put my name? And it's in the box there. Eileen, where do I put my name? Is because in the panic of the situation, they're not fully functioning correctly. And one of the joys of having somebody who has developed resilience is that actually one of the kind of the really good outputs of that is actually they can stay quite level-headed when times of change come with us. So lots of communication there. What have we got? Absolutely, it is about being honest. It is about being honest about what the change is, and it's really my there's a great book called which you might have heard of, Who Moved My Cheese? And my husband is a real cynic, so if somebody drops that on his desk, and he rolls his eyes because he knows he's about to go through a change. So again, there are ways and means about delivering the message and kind of supporting people through the resilience. And again, we have to recognize that when we're improving individuals' resilience, it's not for our benefit. Yes, it will help us deliver the project and deliver the change, but actually we're doing them, it will truly help them in the rest of their career and the rest of their working life as well. So it is important about them recognizing. That's why I said when we who does kind of takes accountability for delivering resilience and kind of upskilling people from a resilience perspective, that we have an individual responsibility to do that as well. Excellent. So we've got kind of quite a few coming in there. As I've said, a lot of the questions have been around kind of where things have come. You'll see that I do have a number of books on my bookshelf. I've got a few here that I kind of picked off the bookshelf in terms of the Hershey and Blanchett. There's quite a few books on emotional resilience, a great set of reading from Harvard Business Reviews on mental toughness. I'll stick them in the in an appendix to the presentation, so you can kind of go and find them, and I'll also find some online aspects for you as well, so there'll be some kind of links in there as well. So if everybody's done, we've got kind of 14 who've contributed to that. We've kept most people to the end. Thank you very much for kind of bearing with me through my travels with PowerPoint. Anybody got any final questions before we all go and have a lovely evening? Any more for any more? Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Maria, for hosting the event this evening. Hopefully we've all picked up something, whether we were new to this or whether we were experienced. I had a great time pulling it together for you, so hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Eileen. It's been great. It's a very great presentation, and it's been a pleasure having you in Business Change. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.